Hey everyone, welcome to another Modern Deck Tech. Today we're going to be looking at Grixis Magmatic Delver. So it's another Delver deck, this time in Grixis colors, so blue, black, and red. No access to green, meaning no Tarmogoyf, nothing like that, unfortunately. Very sad. But we're going to see what we can do with Magmatic Channeler instead. And another cool little 1/1 flyer for 1 blue that I came across recently and I've been having a lot of fun with. Before we get to the deck though, just a quick little ask from you, if you could hit that subscribe button. If you enjoy my content and you want to see more, I would really appreciate it. It really goes a long way to hit that button down there below somewhere on the YouTube page. It takes a couple of seconds for you, but for me and the channel it makes a big difference and I would really appreciate it. Of course, and if you end up enjoying this video, hit that thumbs up button as well. That also helps me out a lot. And of course, if you want to share this on Facebook or Twitter or Reddit or any other social media with your friends or your group, whatever, that helps me out even more. So I would really appreciate that kind of support, of course, if you enjoy my content. Alright, so let's get to the core. Well, it's a Delver deck, so of course we're playing Delver of Secrets. It's an awesome card, it's an awesome creature. You know, I think if you watch enough of my deck techs in the past year, you know pretty much all I need to say about Delver of Secrets. So let's get to the other namesake of this deck, which is Magmatic Channeler. So I could have just played Gurmag Angler and Tasigur and played a more traditional Grixis Delver deck, but then what was the point? The whole point here is for me to try out different ideas in decks and see what sticks in Modern. So when Magmatic Channeler was first spoiled during Zendikar Rising, I was pretty excited. I didn't think it was going to be a broken creature, and it's not. But I think it's actually pretty cool. And in the right shell, it could be pretty potent. And I think in the shell that I built here, Magmatic Channeler is actually pretty effective. So let's take a look here. 1 colorless, 1 red. It's a 1/3 as a start. And as long as there are 4 or more instants and sorcery cards in your graveyard, Magmatic Channeler gets +3/+1. So it ends up becoming a 4/4. Now, it doesn't have any other kind of evasion. It doesn't have trample, which is not evasion, but it'd be able to trample over smaller creatures. That would be nice. It doesn't fly or anything like that. But a 4/4 is a 4/4, and it can come toe-to-toe with a lot of other creatures in the format. And what's cool about its other ability is you can tap it, discard a card, exile the top 2 cards of your library, then choose one of them. You may play that card this turn, which is actually also pretty cool. So if you're in the mid to late game, the game is stalled a bit, maybe you've overdrawn on some lands, or there's a spell that you drew that you do not need, this is actually a great effect. So instead of attacking with Magmatic Channeler, you can tap it, discard that card, and then potentially draw, into an answer that you actually require. So I actually like that about Magmatic Channeler. It actually has dual functions in that instance, and yeah, it's actually worked out for me quite a bit in the games that I've played with this deck. So I really like Magmatic Channeler in that sense. I think I'm playing 28 to 29 instants and sorceries in this deck. It's a lot of instants and sorceries, so you're going to be playing a lot of instants and sorceries anyway, early game, mid game, late game. This is almost always going to be a 4/4 very soon after it hits the battlefield. Or if not a 4/4 the minute it hits the battlefield. So Magmatic Channeler has been pretty cool. Again, it's not backbreaking for your opponent, but it's a nice little threat to have. And worst case, you can use its discard ability to draw into more answers. Now, another creature that I discovered recently, I saw this in some lists, and I can't believe I kind of missed this. I was around the time when I was getting back into Magic a bit more seriously, so I guess I missed it during spoiler season, but Terramander, man, Terramander is such an awesome card. It's a Salamander Drake, which I guess now is a thing, which is kind of funny. So let's just take a look at it here and compare it to Delver a bit. It's definitely not a Delver Secrets, but it's a 1/1 for 1 blue. It has flying, and it has Adapt 4. So, you got to pay full cost 7 colorless and the blue, which is a lot. It's 8 mana. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. When you do activate it, though, if it has no +1/+1 counters on it, you put 4 +1/+1 counters on it. So it basically becomes a 5/5 flyer. Now, look at Magmatic Channeler for a second. The whole point here is that we want to cast our instants and sorceries, get him into the graveyard to make Magmatic Channeler a 4/4. So a large theme of this deck is get instants and sorceries into your graveyard. Ideally by casting them and doing something to your opponent or for you. So basically, Salamander rewards you by simply playing your deck and interacting with your opponent or cantripping or whatever you're doing. That's what I like about Salamander. That's what I like about playing decks like this, is that there are creatures that reward you for actually being interactive and not necessarily playing solitaire with yourself. You know, which is what I feel boring decks are. So Salamander is actually really, really awesome. Every time I play it, my opponent waits before they pass priority, because I know they're reading the card. They don't see it often, and they're just trying to figure out, okay, is this, do I want to kill Salamander, do I want to kill Delver, or do I want to kill Magmatic Channeler? They got to make the decision. The thing is, a 5/5 flyer late game is very, very scary if they can't get rid of it. So, you know, the Adapt 4 ability, you wait until the last minute, essentially, to activate it when you're swinging in, and when you're sure you could either protect Salamander, or your opponent has nothing in hand, or you don't think they can do anything, you activate the Adapt 4, and boom, all of a sudden, for anywhere between 1 and 3 mana overall, maybe sometimes 4, you have a 5/5 flyer late game, and it could end the game immediately, especially if your opponent, you know, miscalculates and maybe tries to bolt it before you activate Adapt, and then you could activate Adapt in response. Whatever it is, Salamander is actually very scary. The Salamander Drake becomes a 5/5 quite quickly and can end games very quickly, and you'll see that in the 3 matches that I post up today. So, you know, maybe I should have called this Grixis Salamander Delver, but Magmatic Channeler is really the centerpiece here. But what I like about Magmatic Channeler and Salamander is that they both feed off of the instants and sorceries in the graveyard without actually getting rid of them. So these aren't delve spells where you have to exile those instants and sorceries from the graveyard. They just need to be there, and that's what I like about these 2 creatures. So let's move on to the other creatures in the deck. So I'm playing 2 Snapcaster Mages. Yeah, I mean, as we are getting instants and sorceries in the graveyard, Snapcaster Mage can come in handy here and there. Yes, it kind of hurts the Adapt 4 ability from Salamander, for example, but it's not that bad. I mean, you're not playing Snapcaster to flashback some useless card. You know, Snapcaster Bolt or Snapcaster, whatever it may be, is going to be a very powerful play, so getting rid of 1 instant sorcery in your graveyard is not the end of the world. Plus, we're only playing 2 of them, not 4 of them, so you're not playing too many of him. But I think Snapcaster does help give this deck, give it a bit more reach to end out games last minute when you need it to. So the cantrips. So we're playing a decent amount of cantrips here. Serum Visions, of course we're playing Serum Visions. Definitely one of the best cantrips in Modern. Then we're playing 4 Thought Scour. Now, Thought Scour I usually play in decks where, or most of the time I'm playing it in decks where I'm delving with my creatures, so I want to fill up my graveyard as quickly as possible, so I can delve out big creatures early on. Or in my Tarmohawk decks where I might target my opponent to fill more card types in their graveyard to make my Nighthawk Scavenger bigger, whatever it may be. That's usually why I'm playing Thought Scour. In this case, I'm playing Thought Scour to often target myself, to fill my graveyard with ideally more instants and sorceries, to also help with reducing the cost of Salamander, or, you know, buffing up Magmatic Channeler to a 4/4 last minute, maybe as my opponent is trying to remove them. So Thought Scour is the cantrip that we'd be using in that instance. I mean, I think 4 perfectly makes sense in this type of shell. Then we're also playing 4 Opts. So again, we want to cantrip a lot here. There's a lot of cantripping in this deck, and you want to get cards into your graveyard as quickly as possible. Instants and sorceries, I should say, as quickly as possible. So Opt does that job as well. Squirrel, draw a card for 1 blue. Very powerful at instant speed. Then let's take a look at the removal. So we have 2 Fatal Push. Yep, why not? We're playing back. We have 4 Lightning Bolt, and we have 2 Cling to Dust. So 2 Fatal Push, of course, to get rid of creatures. I like black that it has more efficient removal. It's not just damage based, so that's very good. I'm playing 4 Lightning Bolt as well because it's Lightning Bolt. Don't really need to spend a few more. I don't need to spend time on explaining to you why we're playing 4 Lightning Bolt. And we're playing Cling to Dust. So Cling to Dust definitely was a hedge against Uro decks. When I was playing this, when Uro was still legal in Modern, but it's not, it's banned. But I think Cling to Dust can be your flex spot in this case. So you could remove it and replace it with more Fatal Pushes, or you can replace it with any kind of other removal. It doesn't really matter. This could be a flex spot, but I still like the ability to be able to target a card in a graveyard, whatever that card may be, whether it's a creature or not, and gaining 3 life or drawing an extra card. Again, it's another cantrip, or it can be another cantrip, or it gives you 3 life. And there's a lot of blitz decks in the meta right now. There's a lot of burn and prowess, so getting 3 life is not nothing. And you know, there's going to be creatures in their graveyard for sure that you can target, or in your own graveyard that you can target. So I think Cling to Dust actually still makes sense even in a post-Uro meta. So then we're also playing Permission. We're playing 3 Mana Leaks and 4 Force of Negations. I think this is actually a pretty good, you know, Permission package. No, we're not playing Stubborn Denial because we don't have consistent creatures that have 4 toughness or more. So I didn't think Stubborn Denial was stable enough to play in this kind of a deck. But playing 4 Force of Negations and 3 Mana Leaks is perfectly fine. You can play with these numbers if you feel you don't want to play too much Permission, and maybe you want to be a bit more gas and a bit, you know, be a bit more proactive and a bit less reactive. Then you can cut these numbers a bit, but I think it's a good enough package to deal with the other combo decks that are currently in the meta. We're playing some discard spells as well, Inquisition of Kozilek, so you can up this number as well. Let's say if you remove some Cling to Dust, if you want to be a bit more proactive in taking cards out of your opponent's hand. You're playing black, so you have access to Inquisition of Kozilek or Thoughtseize, so you know this is something else that you can also up the number of if you feel like you want to be more, if you want to do more discard as well. But I played with 2 and I was happy with 2 in the deck. So the land's pretty similar to Temur Delver decks that I play. I'm just swapping, you know, anything that produces green to produce black. So we're playing 1 Blood Crypt, 2 Steam Vents, 1 Watery Grave, and then you have your fetches, of course, and you have your basics. So I'm not playing any basic mountains, still don't need those, but you definitely want at least 1 basic swamp and 2 islands. So you can fetch. They could be targets for Field of the Dead, but Field of Ruin, I should say, or Ghost Quarter, or Path to Exile, whatever it may be. You still want some basics, of course, if you also want to work around Blood Moon. And the sideboard. So I'm putting in 1 Thoughtseize in there. Again, you would bring it in against big mana decks or combo decks if you want to be dealing with your opponent's hand more. Thoughtseize is important there. Engineer Explosives as well is a good sweeper in general. You are playing 3 colors as well, so if you need to target you know, permanents that are up to 3 CMC, Engineer Explosives is very important, very powerful here. So that's why I enjoy playing Engineer Explosives in some number in my sideboard. Ceremonious Rejection as well to deal with artifact decks or Tron decks, whatever it may be. There's plenty of decks out there that are going full colorless right now, so 1 mana counterspell, pretty powerful in that instance. 2 Abrades for dealing with artifacts as well as just being a creature removal when necessary. Grafdigger's Cage for graveyard strategies, whatever they may be, whether it's blue-white control or dredge or whatever, anything that's trying to still deal with the graveyard. Grafdigger's Cage is pretty powerful there. Playing 2 Dismembers as well. This can be changed for something else if you don't want it to be Dismember, since you do technically have better removal in black that doesn't, you know, rely on dealing damage. But in this case, you're not dealing damage. It's -5/-5. So if you want to get rid of a creature that's indestructible, Dismember is better in that instance. So I think there's some play to keep Dismember in your 75. And of course, Blood Moon. You can definitely play Blood Moon with the mana base that's in this deck. So, you know, if you're comfortable with Blood Moon and fetching accordingly, knowing how to play it and when to put it down, I think Blood Moon is still very powerful, and I think you should be playing it in decks that can stomach it. Alright, the matchups. So when it comes to combo, especially the new kinds of combo that we're seeing, it really depends. If it's spell-based combo, I think you have quite a bit of play against them. You can keep up your threats, and you have a decent amount of permission to counter their spells when you need to kind of put a damper on combo. If you're dealing with Primeval Titan decks, you have Blood Moon to be able to deal with their lands and effectively shut them off. You know, then there's the whole Heliod combo, and Heliod combo is going to be a lot more difficult for you to deal with. You may need to, if Heliod combo remains a mainstay in Modern, you may need to modify your sideboard to add cards that exile enchantments as opposed to destroy them. So you can get rid of Heliod, for example, because it is indestructible, so that is a problem. But combo decks in general, I think you have a relatively good matchup. When it comes to aggro, well, aggro is definitely going to be a problem if they go wide too quickly. Your sideboard is going to be your friend in aggro matchups. That being said, your creatures can get pretty big pretty quickly, and you do pack a decent amount of removal and some life gain in the main. So I think you can actually deal with aggro quite well, so long as they don't have the nuts. If they have the nuts, then you're going to have issues game 1. So game 2 is really going to be, game 2 and 3 are going to be your friend. But if you manage to snag a win game 1, that puts you way ahead, because now your opponent's on the defensive and you can bring in extra sideboard cards to help you out. So hopefully you win in game 1. And if you do, you're pretty much, you know, you're well positioned to win the match, in my opinion. But aggro decks are definitely going to be something you're going to have to contend with. They're probably going to be your worst matchups. When it comes to big mana decks, I think overall you have quite a bit of tools in the main and in the side to deal with big mana, so I'm less concerned about big mana decks. I'm not saying that they're easy wins, but you do have better removal options now with black. So yeah, I think we deal with big mana decks pretty well. I didn't play against too many big mana decks. I didn't play against many Eldrazi decks, but again, if we did, I think we'd be relatively okay. Not Magic, well, Dredge, I'm thinking of even dropping in these matchup analysis, because Dredge is you're either going to run into it or you're not. But I keep Dredge there, not just for Dredge decks, but any deck that really heavily relies on graveyard, even Oops All spells or whatever it may be. That's really what the not Magic section is, or prison decks that, you know, play Chalice on turn 0, which don't exist anymore thanks to Simian Spirit Guide being banned, you know, luckily. But that's really what the not Magic section is. You know, when you're playing some deck that's doing something extremely degenerate, that's not Magic for me. So against decks like that, as usual, it's mostly a toss-up. I don't think you should necessarily build your sideboards for those type of decks, unless your local meta is heavy in degenerate decks, in which case, if you can't change your local meta, adapt to it. Control, I think Control overall, they're going to have some issues with, you know, keeping up with your creatures. Not that you're running too many, but they are all problematic and they all need to be answered in one form or another. You would have your own set of permission spells to kind of deal with them. If they're trying to counter you, you can play your counter wars a bit. If there's a lot of control coming up in your meta, you can, you know, put Mystical Dispute in your sideboard. You know, you could adjust your sideboard and even your main board accordingly to deal with more control matchups. And yeah, I mean, you have big flyers, which will deal with their big flyers, you know, their big finishers. So I'm not too concerned about control decks. You have plenty of tools in the main and definitely in the sideboard to deal with them. So I think control matchups are at least 50-50. I don't think they're completely horrible here. And when it comes to mid-range decks, if you're very comfortable against playing against mid-range and you're comfortable playing decks like Delver decks, I think mid-range games are going to be relatively okay for you. If they get a foothold early on, that may be a problem for you to catch up. But again, you have Terramander, which can come down late game, and unlike Delver, which requires you to flip it even late game, Terramander can be adapted immediately late game. So you can become a 5/5 immediately and dodge some damage-based removal spells, and then finish out the game a turn after. So Terramander is pretty good in that instance against mid-range decks, where there's a lot of attrition and a lot of back and forth. I think mid-range games overall, or mid-range matchups overall are going to be okay, not great, not horrible. So I mean, like most matchups, I think it's fair. Mid-range games are going to be fair against a deck like this. That's pretty much it. I really enjoy playing Grixis Magmatic Delver. Definitely Grixis is not my favorite color combination, it's not my favorite shard or whatever. I much prefer Temur, of course, and you know, some others like Sultai. Because I have access to green. Definitely miss having access to green. The lack of Veil of Summer and Tarmogoyf definitely apparent when you're playing decks like Grixis decks. But overall, I really enjoyed how the cards all came together, and especially the way Magmatic Channeler and Terramander both relied on the graveyard in almost the same manner to power up. So I really like that. I wouldn't call it synergy, but it's definitely synergizing with the same graveyard strategy, which I think is pretty cool. Definitely fun to play this deck. I'm posting up 3 matches today just to give you an idea of how this deck plays. So stay tuned for that. As usual, I always post up 3 matches for my modern deck techs. And yeah, let me know in the comment section down below what you think, what I could have added, what I should change. Like I said, I didn't want to play some standard Grixis Delver deck, because then there wouldn't really be a point in deck teching it. You could just go read on it on a million other websites that are talking about standard Grixis Delver decks. So if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you enjoy my content in general, please subscribe, hit notification bell. All that stuff really helps me out a lot. Following me on Twitter and Facebook also helps. Sharing my content on those social media networks is like an extra level, which helps me out even more. So I would really appreciate you doing stuff like that. If you enjoy my content and you would like me to, you know, help support the channel in the most free way you can, which is, you know, clicking with your mouse. I would really appreciate it. If you want to do a bit more and join my Patreon community and, you know, help that grow as it is growing right now, check out the link in the description of this video. You know, I've set up tiers in a way that at the end of every year, if you've been a patron for at least 6 months, I give back some of your money in the form of magic cards. So check that out. All the information is on Patreon. Thanks, and have a good one.